scammed me out of $200,000 in a project that never existed. Then he said it straight to my face. Dad, you're old. What do you need that much money for? Just consider it your responsibility as a parent. I didn't say a word. I just smiled and walked away. He thought I was just a clueless old man who didn't know anything. I knew I had to teach him a lesson. So on his birthday, I prepared a surprise gift. An envelope. They thought it was just a present. They never imagined that what was inside that envelope could destroy everything. Thank you for staying with me. Before we go on, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your voice matters here more than you think. And just to be clear, some details in this story have been fictionalized for educational and storytelling purposes. Any similarity to real names or settings is purely coincidental, but the lesson behind it is real and worth hearing. The restaurant had been my idea. I'd suggested it 3 weeks ago when Kyle mentioned wanting something special for his 35th birthday. Marcello's the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list thicker than most novels. The kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts between courses, where conversations stayed civil even when they shouldn't. I was counting on that civility tonight. The envelope sat in my jacket pocket. A simple white rectangle that felt heavier with each passing minute. I'd sealed it that morning in my kitchen, standing at the counter where Carol used to sort mail. 3 years since cancer took her, and I still caught myself setting out 2 coffee mugs some mornings. Dad, you're quiet tonight. Kyle's voice pulled me back. He sat across from me, 35 years old, and looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. His smile was easy practiced. His mother's smile, Carol's smile, the same one that used to light up our kitchen on Saturday mornings when Kyle was small enough to sit on the counter and steal bites of pancake batter. Just tired, I said. You know how it is. Retirement treating you that badly. He laughed, raising his wine glass. Come on, Dad. You've got it made. House paid off, pension coming in. Hell, I should be so lucky. Around the table, Kyle's guests laughed on cue. Courtney, his wife, managed a thin smile. She'd barely touched her food, I noticed. Kept checking her phone under the table, that nervous energy radiating off her that I'd seen more often lately. Pretty girl too young for Kyle when they'd met, though that wasn't my business. 27 to his 30 back then. Now she looked older than her 32 years. Philip Carver sat 2 seats down nursing his second scotch. My best friend for 40 years. We'd met at the factory, both of us fresh out of school, and stupid enough to think assembly line work would last forever. It had lasted long enough, 30 years for me, before my knees gave out, and they offered early retirement. Philip had stuck it out longer, scraped together enough to start a small business. Failed twice, but he was trying again. He wouldn't look at me. I'd noticed it when I'd arrived, the way his eyes had slid past mine during the handshake. The way he'd positioned himself at the far end of the table. Philip, who'd sat with me through Carol's final days, who'd helped me clean out her closet when I couldn't do it alone, who knew where I kept my spare key and which drawer held the good whiskey. Something was wrong. The waiter appeared with dessert, some elaborate chocolate thing Kyle had ordered for the table. Courtney excused herself, mumbling about the restroom. I watched her weave through the tables, shoulders hunched. When I turned back, Philip was staring into his drink, like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. Time for the gift, Kyle announced, all teeth and charm. Come on, Dad. You've been sitting on that envelope all night. How did he know I hadn't mentioned it, hadn't told anyone? But Kyle's eyes flickered to my jacket pocket for just a second, quick enough that anyone else would have missed it. Not quick enough to hide from someone who'd raised him. Someone who'd learned to read his tells during countless poker games at the kitchen table. I pulled out the envelope, felt the weight of it in my hands. Felt 20 pairs of eyes watching. Kyle reached across the table, that smile still fixed in place, but his fingers trembled when they touched the paper. Just a tremor, gone in an instant. Thanks, Dad. His voice was steady. Too steady. You didn't have to. Open it later, I said, My mouth was dry. When you get home. Oh, come on. Kyle's laugh sounded forced now. Don't be modest. Everyone wants to see what the old man got me. The old man. He'd never called me that before. Later, I repeated. The moment stretched. Kyle's smile tightened at the edges. Around us, conversation had died. Even the restaurant noise seemed muted, the clink of silverware, the murmur of other diners, the soft jazz from hidden speakers. All of it distant, like I was underwater. Kyle slipped the envelope into his pocket. Sure. Later. Thanks, Dad. The rest of dinner crawled by. More wine I didn't drink. More conversation I didn't follow. Philip left early, claiming he'd promised Marilyn his sister, not his wife. He'd never married, he'd help with something. He clapped my shoulder on the way out, a gesture that felt like goodbye. By 9, I was in my truck, pulling out of the parking lot, while Kyle and Courtney dealt with the bill. I'd offered to pay. Kyle had waved me off, insisted it was his party. The irony wasn't lost on me. The drive home took 20 minutes through streets I'd known my whole life. Past the high school where Kyle had played baseball, past the park where I'd taught him to throw a football, even though he'd never quite gotten the spiral right. Past Carol's favorite coffee shop closed, now replaced by some chain place that sold foam and cups. My house sat dark at the end of Maple Street. Small 2-bedroom bought 40 years ago when interest rates were murder, and Carol had been pregnant with Julia. Paid off now. Empty now. Just me and too many memories packed into too few rooms. I sat in the truck for a long time, engine ticking as it cooled. The envelope Kyle should have opened was gone, but there was another envelope, the one I'd made a copy of before dinner, the one now sitting in my glove compartment. Inside, I poured 3 fingers of whiskey I wouldn't drink. Set it on the kitchen counter. Turned on the light over the sink, the same light Carol used to leave on when I worked nights. Pulled out the envelope and stared at it. White paper, black ink, my name typed on the front. I'd received it Thursday. Today was Saturday. I'd spent 2 days deciding whether to show Kyle, whether to confront Philip, whether to call Julia overseas and tell her something was wrong, but I didn't know what. Instead, I'd made a copy. Sealed the original. Given it to Kyle as a gift. Now I opened the copy. The letterhead read Stephen Bradley, CPA, and the first line made my blood run cold. The kitchen was too quiet. 10:47. I'd been sitting here since 9:30, Stephen Bradley's letter spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what this was. Evidence. I picked up the first page again. 3rd time reading it. The words hadn't changed. Dear Warren, I hope this letter finds you well, though I regret the circumstances that compel me to write it. Over the past month, while conducting my annual review of your accounts, I've discovered several irregularities that require your immediate attention. Irregularities. Such a clean word for what came next. Your investment account with Sullivan Investment Consulting shows a total deposit of $200,000 over an 18-month period from June 2023 through December 2023. According to the documentation you provided last April, these investments were to generate returns of 12% annually with quarterly distributions. $200,000. Carol's life insurance $100,000 from the policy her employer had kept. Our savings another $100,000 scraped together over 30 years of factory wages and nursing shifts and tax returns we'd been careful with. My safety net. Julia's inheritance someday. The money for my own end-of-life care so she wouldn't shoulder that burden. However, Sullivan Investment Consulting is not registered with the SEC, nor does it appear on any state business registries. Furthermore, bank records show that funds transferred to Sullivan Investment Consulting were immediately moved to personal accounts under Kyle Sullivan's name. There is no evidence of actual investment activity. The money simply disappeared into personal spending. Stephen had underlined that last sentence. Once. A single blue line that made it worse than if he'd used bold type. Stephen didn't do dramatic. If he was underlining something, it was because nothing else would make me understand. My hands shook. I stood, walked to the counter where I'd left my laptop, logged into my bank's website with the password Carol had made me write down and tape inside the kitchen drawer. In case something happens to me, she'd said. Checking account $3,847.23. Savings account $12,332.09. Investment account $847.15. I clicked through transaction history. $80,000 in July 2023. 60 more in October. The final 60 in December, right before Christmas. Kyle had called Christmas Eve, told me the first quarter returns looked promising. He'd bring the paperwork when he visited New Year's. He never came. Said Courtney's mother was sick. Back at the table, I found the brochures Kyle had given me. Professional-looking things with skyscrapers and growth charts. Sullivan Investment Consulting, building your financial future. My son's face on the back page, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. Looking like a stranger. Warren, I must advise immediate action. Secure any remaining assets. Consider freezing your credit. And while I'm not an attorney, I believe you should consult one regarding potential legal remedies. I attempted to contact Kyle directly, hoping for a reasonable explanation. He has not returned my calls. Of course he hadn't. 3 hours ago at dinner. Kyle's trembling fingers when he'd touched that envelope. The way he'd insisted on opening it later away from witnesses. He'd known what was inside. Known that I knew. And he'd smiled anyway. Trust me, Dad. That's what he'd said 6 months ago in this same kitchen. Carol's chair empty across from me. Julia deployed somewhere she couldn't talk about. Kyle had spread his papers across this table, showed me numbers, explained how this was his chance. How he'd learned from Philip's business mistakes. How he wanted to make something of himself. I'm doing this for us, he'd said. For you. So you don't have to worry about money. So I can take care of you the way you took care of Mom. I'd believed him. God help me, I'd wanted to believe. The whiskey I'd poured earlier sat untouched. I drank it now. One swallow. It burned, settled like a coal in my empty stomach. Stephen's letter had one more paragraph. This is never easy. I've known Kyle since he was a boy. I remember him playing in my office while I did your taxes, building forts from file boxes. But the evidence here is clear and troubling. You deserve to know the truth. Please call when you're ready to discuss next steps. With sincere concern, Stephen, I folded the letter. 3 crisp creases the way Carol had taught me. Set it aside. Carol's photo sat on the counter, our 20th anniversary. Her smile, bright eyes clear. She'd been healthy then. Happy. What would she say about Kyle stealing from me? About me being fool enough to hand over everything we'd built? No. She would have believed him too. Kyle was our son. You didn't raise a child for 35 years and assume he was capable of this. Except maybe you should have. All those warning signs over the years. Money borrowed in high school, never repaid. Calling Carol only when he needed something. Asking about the inheritance before we'd buried her. I'd explained it away. He's young. He's grieving. I was done explaining, but I wasn't done needing answers. Stephen had given me the what. I needed the who, the how much more. If Philip was involved. If there were others. If Courtney knew. My phone sat charging by the coffee maker. I unplugged it, found the number I'd saved 6 months ago. My neighbor's kid had gotten into trouble, needed someone who could dig deeper than police were willing to go. Andrea Stone, private investigator. I'd call her in the morning. Tonight I needed to accept that my son had stolen from me. That the boy I'd taught to throw a football, who'd helped me build a deck, who'd held my hand at his mother's funeral, that boy had looked me in the eye and robbed me blind. Carol's photo stared at me. In it, Kyle was maybe 7, 8 years old. Small enough to fit on her lap. Gap-toothed and innocent. When had that kid disappeared? When had the lies started? I set the photo face down. Couldn't look at young Kyle and not wonder where I'd gone wrong. Tomorrow I'd start looking for answers. Tonight, I'd sit here in the wreckage of what I'd thought I knew. The photograph caught my eye around midnight, Carol and me on our 20th anniversary. Kyle grinning between us with that gap-toothed smile. It sat beside the sink where I'd been standing, trying to make sense of Stephen's warning. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The glass felt cold against my fingertips. That smile. God, that smile used to light up every room. I met Carol in 1987 at Glendale Community College. She was studying to become a nurse. I was getting my welding certification after 2 failed semesters at a 4-year school I couldn't afford. She wore scrubs, even to English class, always rushing from her hospital volunteer shift. I asked her about the stethoscope around her neck. She told me it was her grandfather's, that he'd delivered babies in rural Tennessee for 40 years. We got married at the courthouse in 1988. $23 for the license. Carol's mother cried because we didn't have a church wedding, but we had rent to pay and a baby on the way. Kyle arrived on March 15, 1989 at 3 in the morning after 18 hours of labor. 7 pounds, 12 ounces. Carol had insisted on natural birth, no epidural, no medication. She gripped my hand so hard I lost feeling in 3 fingers. When the nurse finally placed him in my arms, his eyes locked onto mine. I promised him right then that I'd be the father I never had, that I'd show up, that I'd be present. 2 years later, Julia came. Kyle had been jealous at first, stealing her pacifier, hiding her bottles. But Carol had a gift for making both of them feel loved, for carving out time when there was never enough. I enlisted in the Navy in 1992. We needed the income, the healthcare, the benefits. Carol managed everything during my deployments. She sent letters every week, detailed updates about Kyle's first day of kindergarten, Julia's first words. She enclosed crayon drawings they'd made, construction paper cards that fell apart in my duffel bag. The warning signs started early. Kyle was clever. Teachers adored him. He'd charm his way out of trouble, turn in assignments late with elaborate stories about family emergencies that never happened. At 15, money started disappearing from Carol's purse. $20 here, $40 there. Never enough to be certain, always just below the threshold of proof. Junior year of high school, he asked to borrow $300 for a class trip to Washington, D.C. I gave it to him without question. He never paid it back. When I mentioned it 6 months later, he acted confused, said he'd given me cash one night when I was watching television. I had no memory of it, but I didn't push. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I'd been too tired to notice. The lies were small at first. Grade reports that didn't match what the school sent home. College acceptance letters that never arrived. Explanations that didn't quite add up but weren't worth the fight. 6 months before her cancer diagnosis, Carol tried to warn me. We were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. She'd been quiet all evening. "Kyle isn't like Julia," she said finally. "He burns through money like it's paper. He's starting a business," I'd said. "It takes time to build something." "Warren." Her voice had gone sharp. "He's 29 years old. Old enough to know right from wrong." I'd changed the subject. Told her she worried too much. That Kyle just needed room to figure things out. The pancreatic cancer came fast. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. During those final weeks at the hospice facility, Carol tried again. "Watch him around money," she'd whispered one afternoon, her voice barely audible over the oxygen machine. "Promise me you'll be careful." I'd promised, but I hadn't understood. Not really. Kyle asked about the life insurance payout 3 days after we buried her. Not how I was doing. Not whether I needed help with the house. Just wanted to know if the policy had paid out yet. The check arrived 2 weeks later, $100,000. 20 years of premiums paying into a future Carol would never see. I gave Kyle $50,000 to start his business. Julia was furious. Said I was enabling him, that Mom would never have wanted this, that I needed to set boundaries. But boundaries felt like admitting Carol had been right. And admitting that meant acknowledging I'd failed her. The kitchen window had started to lighten. Dawn was coming, turning the sky from black to deep blue to that pale gray that meant morning was close. I set the photograph back on the counter, careful not to smudge the glass. Carol had known. All of it. She'd tried to tell me from that hospital bed, tried to protect me even when she was dying. And I'd ignored her. Told myself she was being paranoid, that the pain medication was making her suspicious. I thought about Stephen's numbers. $200,000 over 18 months. Sullivan Investment Consulting, a company that didn't exist. 12% returns that never materialized. Money flowing into Kyle's personal accounts. While I'd sat here alone in this paid-off house, trusting my son, because fathers were supposed to trust their sons. The photograph stared back at me. Kyle's gap-toothed grin frozen in time. Carol's hand on his shoulder. My arm around both of them. I picked up my phone, found the business card Andrea Stone had given me 2 years ago when Carol died. She'd helped track down some of Carol's relatives for the service. I'd tucked it in the drawer by the coffee maker, forgotten about it until tonight. The screen glowed in the dim kitchen light. Andrea Stone, private investigator. Licensed. Insured. Discreet. Carol had fought to the end. I wouldn't stop either. 3 days passed before I could bring myself to act. On Wednesday afternoon, I drove downtown to meet the woman whose business card I'd kept since Carol's funeral, Andrea Stone, the private investigator who'd helped me track down relatives for the service. Her office sat above a dry cleaner on 5th Street. The stairwell smelled like fabric softener. She was waiting when I reached the top. Late 40s, sharp eyes that studied me before I'd crossed the threshold. Her handshake was firm. "Mr. Sullivan, come in." The office was small but organized. Filing cabinets, a desk with dual monitors, certificates on the walls. One showed her license, Private Investigator, State of California, 2003. Another from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. "You mentioned financial fraud," she said. "Tell me what happened." I handed her Stephen's letter. She read it without expression, then set it down carefully. "When did the investments begin?" "June 2023. He showed me brochures, professional looking, said it was exclusive. Documentation, study quarterly reports by email, always showed positive returns, until they stopped." She made notes. "Here's how this works. I'll conduct forensic accounting, track where the money went, run corporate background checks, interview potential victims if I find them, build a complete picture." The words "complete picture" made my chest tight. My retainer is $3,000. After that, $150 per hour. Most cases like this take 40 to 60 hours total. I wrote the check with steady hands. While I signed her contract, she turned to her computer. 30 seconds later, she stopped. "Sullivan Investment Consulting." She turned the monitor toward me. "Not registered with the SEC. No federal registration at all." I couldn't breathe. "Let me check state records." More typing. "Nothing in California's business registry. No articles of incorporation. No license in Los Angeles County." She looked at me. "Your son's company doesn't legally exist." The office seemed to shrink. "I'll need a week, maybe 2. She said, her voice softer now. "Act normal. Don't confront him. Don't mention you've hired me." "He already knows," I said. I gave him Stephen's letter at his birthday dinner. Her expression shifted slightly. "So he knows you know?" "Yes." "All right, I'll send updates via email. You'll have results within a week." The email arrived 7 days later at 11:43 p.m. Subject line, "Sullivan Investigation Initial Report." I was in bed, laptop balanced on my knees. I read it 3 times. "Sullivan Investment Consulting operates as a sole proprietorship. No employees, no physical office. The business address is a P.O. box at Mail Plus on Ventura Boulevard. Bank records show all investor funds were wired directly into Kyle Sullivan's personal checking account within 1 business day of receipt. No evidence of legitimate investment activity. No stock purchases, no bond transactions, no securities trading. Then came the money trail. $45,000 BMW 340 on October 2023. Kyle had called it a business lease. $18,000 jewelry at Tiffany & Company. 3 purchases over 4 months. Earrings, bracelet, necklace for Courtney. $12,000 Caribbean vacation rental, February 2024. He'd called it a business conference. $8,000 restaurants. Morton's, Capitol Grill. Per se in New York. Total traced $83,000. Unaccounted $117,000. Possible cryptocurrency offshore accounts or cash withdrawals. I scrolled down. The next section made my stomach drop. Investigation has identified 12 additional investors beyond Warren Sullivan. Most are elderly individuals who invested retirement savings. Combined losses across all 13 victims approximately $1.2 million. $1.2 million. 12 other families who'd trusted Kyle, who'd believed his promises, who'd signed over their life savings because they thought he was building something real. The final section was titled Secondary Participant Analysis. Bank records reveal wire transfers from Kyle Sullivan to Philip Carver over 22 months. Payments $4,000 to $8,000 monthly. Meeting logs show dozens of meetings between Sullivan and Carver, cross-referencing victim statements. 4 of 12 additional victims were introduced through Philip Carver members of his veterans group and St. Michael's Episcopal Church. Conclusion: Philip Carver functioned as recruiter receiving commission-style payments for investor referrals. 40 years of friendship. Carol's funeral, where Philip stood beside me at the grave and told me I wasn't alone. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas Eves. The weekend, he helped me replace the roof after the storm, both of us laughing about getting too old for this kind of work. He'd introduced Kyle to people who trusted him, people who believed his endorsement meant something. He'd taken thousands while they lost their retirement. I closed the laptop, sat in darkness. My son was a thief. My best friend was his accomplice. Everything I'd believed was a lie. The attic stairs creaked under my weight. That same night, hours after Andrea's report, had torn apart everything I thought I knew. I needed to understand how Carol had seen this coming and why I'd been too blind to listen. The air up there was thick with summer heat and 20 years of accumulated dust. 5 cardboard boxes sat in the corner, labeled in Julia's careful handwriting the week after we'd buried Carol. I hadn't touched them since. Couldn't bring myself to sort through the remnants of a life we'd built together. I opened the one marked personal. 3 spiral notebooks lay on top, their covers worn from handling. Each one labeled in Carol's neat script, 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021. I'd never read her journals when she was alive. It felt like invasion, like stepping into a room where I hadn't been invited. But she was gone now, and I needed answers she could no longer give me in person. I opened the last one. 2020 to 2021. January 17th, 2020. Kyle called, asking for money to fix his car. I told him I'd think about it. Warren already had his checkbook out before I could finish the sentence. March 8th, 2020. Kyle asked for money again. 3rd time this month. Always emergencies. Always urgent. I'm starting to worry. He's 31 years old. When will he learn to stand on his own 2 feet? July 22nd, 2020. Kyle came by tonight with some kind of investment plan. Talked about returns and portfolios. Wanted me to put money in. I said no. He seemed angry, tried to hide it, but I saw it in his eyes. Called me risk-averse, like it was an insult. Something felt wrong about the whole thing. Like he was selling something he didn't believe in himself. October 14th, 2020. Ran into Margaret at the grocery store. She worked with Kyle. She said she was sorry to hear he'd left the company. I smiled and said he was doing fine, but Warren never told me Kyle had quit his job. When I asked Kyle about it later, he said he'd left 3 months ago to focus on his own business venture. 3 months. 3 months of lies, pretending to go to work every single day. My hands were shaking. I turned the page. January 19th, 2021. Kyle brought Philip over for dinner tonight. They kept whispering in the corner, glancing over at Warren every few minutes. I heard them talking about opportunities and investments and limited spots. Philip stood there vouching for Kyle, saying he'd seen the returns himself, that it was all legitimate. But Philip's been drowning in debt for years. 2 failed businesses, a bankruptcy in 2015. If he suddenly has money to invest, where did it come from? I don't trust this. I don't trust either of them. But Warren does. Warren trusts everyone. The next entry was dated June 2021. The handwriting had changed, shakier, harder to read. The cancer had been eating through her by then. She had maybe 8 weeks left. June 3rd, 2021. I'm leaving soon. A month maybe. 2 if I'm unlucky. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving Warren alone. Kyle will come for him the moment I'm in the ground. He'll use Warren's grief against him. Warren won't see it coming, because he still sees Kyle as that little boy who needed us, who couldn't tie his own shoes, who cried when we left him at kindergarten. He doesn't see the man Kyle's become, a liar, a manipulator, someone who uses his own father. I need to warn Warren. But how do you tell someone their son is dangerous? I had to stop, set the notebook down, pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. She'd known. 6 months before she died, she'd seen exactly what was coming. I picked up the journal again, turned to the last entry. November 14th, 2021. 1 month before she died. November 14th, 2021. Philip called today, asked about Warren's finances, how much we'd saved, whether Warren had mentioned what he planned to do with my life insurance money. I told him it was none of his business and hung up. But it confirms everything I've been afraid of. They're planning something. Kyle and Philip together. They're going to target Warren after everything we worked for, after 33 years of building a life together. And I won't be here to stop them. Warren, if you're reading this someday, it means you figured it out. It means Kyle did exactly what I feared he would. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. But now you can protect yourself. Don't let him take anything more from you. Don't let Philip manipulate you with those 40 years of friendship. They both betrayed you. And you deserve better than that. Watch out for Kyle. Watch out for Philip. Trust Julia. She sees things clearly. She always has. I love you more than words can say. See ya. The notebook slipped from my hands. Carol had known. She'd seen this months before it happened. Had tried to warn me even while she was dying. And what had I done 3 days after her funeral? 3 days after we'd lowered her casket into the ground, I'd handed Kyle $50,000. Carol's life insurance money. The policy she'd paid into for 20 years, so I'd be taken care of after she was gone. She'd tried to save me from her nursing home bed. And I'd failed her. The tears came then. Not gentle. Not quiet. The kind that tore through your chest and left you gasping. Shame. Guilt. Rage at myself for being so blind. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough for the light through the attic window to shift from street lamp glow to the deep blue of approaching dawn. Finally I stood. My knees cracked. My back ached. But something had changed. Something had hardened inside my chest. I clutched the diary against me and whispered into the empty attic. I hear you now. I'm sorry it took so long. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Julia. Landing Sunday morning. We need to talk. Julia arrived at 4:30 on Sunday afternoon, 5 days after Kyle's birthday dinner, and 30 minutes before he and Courtney were due to arrive. She stood in my doorway in her navy dress whites, looking so much like Carol it hurt to breathe. Dad. She stepped inside, dropped her duffel bag, and pulled me into a hug. I'm here. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Stephen's letter, where I'd spread out bank statements in the middle of the night. I showed her Andrea's report first, then Carol's diary. Julia read in silence, her jaw tightening with each page. When she finished, she looked up. I knew he was bad with money. I didn't know he was a criminal. Neither did I. We need proof for prosecutors, she said. Her voice had gone tactical the way it did when she was planning missions. Don't confront him until we have everything documented. We do have everything, I said. Andrea found 12 victims, bank records, Philip's payments. It's all there. Julia studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then it's time. Kyle arrived exactly at 5. Courtney beside him, Noah running ahead through the door. My grandson crashed into my legs, giggling. Grandpa, I picked him up, felt his arms around my neck. 5 years old. Still believed the world was good, that people kept their promises. I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. Kyle stood in the entryway, all charm and easy smiles. New watch on his wrist, something expensive, European. Courtney carried a designer purse I didn't recognize. Noah clutched the newest iPad model, luxuries bought with money Kyle had stolen. From me, from 11 other families who'd trusted him. We sat down to dinner. I'd made pot roast Carol's recipe. Julia set the table while Kyle played with Noah in the living room, his laughter carrying into the kitchen like he didn't have a care in the world. How did he do it? How did he sit there knowing what he'd done and act like everything was fine? Courtney barely touched her food. Her eyes darted between Julia and me, then to Kyle, then back. When Julia asked how their finances were going, Courtney's fork clattered against her plate. We're fine, Kyle said smoothly. Business is good. What business is that? Julia asked. Investment consulting. I've told you about it. Right, Sullivan Investment Consulting. Julia's voice was calm, conversational. The one that's not registered with the SEC. The room went silent. Noah was in the other room now, playing with his tablet, oblivious. Kyle set down his fork slowly. What are you talking about? Dad hired an investigator, Julia said. We know about the shell company. We know about the 12 victims. We know about Philip's involvement. Kyle's face changed. The charm fell away like a mask someone had ripped off. For a moment I saw something raw underneath anger, maybe fear. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. This is a misunderstanding. Is it? Julia pulled out her phone, opened Andrea's report. Because we have bank records showing you wired $200,000 of Dad's money into your personal checking account. We have spending records. BMW Caribbean vacation. Jewelry for Courtney. We have testimony from other victims, elderly people who trusted you with their retirement savings. Dad. Kyle turned to me, his voice wounded. You had me investigated, your own son. I thought about Carol's diary. He'll use Warren's grief against him. He doesn't see the man Kyle's become. Yes, I said. Do you have any idea what you've done? Kyle's voice rose. You're destroying this family. You destroyed it, I said quietly. When you decided to steal from your own father. When you recruited Philip to help you prey on his friends. When you lied to Courtney. When you spent stolen money on watches and vacations while people lost their life savings. Courtney stood abruptly. We should go. Sit down, Kyle snapped. She flinched but stayed standing. We have everything, Julia said. Her voice was steel. Bank records, victim statements, paper trails. The FBI will be involved soon if they're not already. Kyle's face went white, then red. You'll never see Noah again. Either of you. I'll make sure of it. The threat landed like a punch. My grandson. The boy who still believed I hung the moon. But I thought about Carol. About Ernest Coleman, 82 years old, who'd lost $150,000. About Violet Morrison, 75, whose retirement fund was gone. About all the families Kyle had destroyed, while he bought designer purses and European watches. You already destroyed it yourself, I said. Kyle stared at me. For a moment I thought he might say something, apologize, explain something. But he just grabbed his keys. Come on, Courtney, get Noah, we're leaving. She moved like someone in a dream, calling Noah from the other room. My grandson appeared in the doorway, iPad in hand, confused. Are we going home already? Yes, Kyle said. Say goodbye to Grandpa. Noah hugged my legs. Bye, Grandpa. I love you. I love you too, buddy. They left. Kyle didn't look back. At the door, he stopped. You'll regret this, Dad. Both of you. Then they were gone. Julia and I sat in the silence. The pot roast was getting cold. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, the same clock Carol had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. I'd lost my son. Maybe my grandson too, at least for now. But when I looked at Julia, at her Navy uniform and her mother's eyes, I knew I'd made the right choice. Julia put her hand on mine. Now we call the FBI. Monday morning arrived with documents spread across my kitchen table. Andrea's investigation report, Stephen's original letter, Carol's diary entries. My bank statements organized in chronological order. Julia had stayed overnight helping me prepare for the call we'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. She'd sorted everything by date. June 2023 to present. 18 months of evidence that my son had systematically stolen from me and 11 other families. You ready? Julia asked. I wasn't. Calling the FB. I made it real in a way nothing else had. Once I made this call, there was no taking it back. No pretending this was just a family matter we could resolve privately. And this will destroy what's left, I said. Dad. Julia's voice was gentle but firm. Kyle chose this path. Not you. He made these decisions. He stole from elderly people. He recruited Philip. He threatened you with Noah. You're not destroying anything. You're stopping him from hurting more people. I knew she was right. Didn't make it easier. I picked up my phone. Dialed the number for the Los Angeles FBI field office that I'd looked up the night before. FBI, how may I direct your call? The Financial Crimes Unit, please. There was a pause, a click, another ring. Special Agent Michelle Brennan, Financial Crimes Unit. Her voice was professional, efficient. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who dealt with criminals every day. My name is Warren Sullivan. I need to report a fraud case, investment fraud, committed by my son. Another pause. I heard typing in the background. Go ahead, Mr. Sullivan. He set up a fake investment company, Sullivan Investment Consulting. Took money from at least 12 people that we know of. Approximately $1.2 million. Maybe more. The typing stopped. When did this begin? June 2023. That's when he first approached me. My accountant discovered irregularities in December. I hired a private investigator in March. She found the other victims. How did you discover the fraud? My accountant sent me a letter. Stephen Bradley. He noticed the money leaving my accounts, but saw no corresponding investment activity. No stock purchases, no bonds, nothing legitimate. Oh, does your son know you're aware of the fraud? I thought about the birthday dinner. The envelope I'd handed him with Stephen's letter inside. Yes. I confronted him about it. When? His birthday, March 16th. Has he made any threats? He said I'd never see my grandson again. That I'd regret reporting him. Michelle's tone shifted, still professional, but more focused. Mr. Sullivan, this sounds like wire fraud, which is a federal offense. You mentioned other victims. Do you have their information? My investigator has it. Names, amounts, stolen dates. And you mentioned he approached you first in June 2023. Did he have any accomplices? Anyone who helped recruit victims, which was Philip Carver, my best friend. He was receiving payments from Kyle $4,000 to $8,000 monthly for 22 months. He introduced at least 4 victims. I heard more typing, fast, deliberate keystrokes. Mr. Sullivan, can you come to our office Wednesday morning, 11 a.m.? Bring all documentation, bank records, the investigator's report, any communications with your son, everything. Yes, I'll be there. This is important. Do not contact your son. Don't tell him you've spoken with us. Don't warn anyone involved. If he's sophisticated enough to set up this scheme, he's sophisticated enough to destroy evidence. Understood? And preserve everything on your end. Don't delete emails, text messages, anything. We'll need it all. I won't. Good. I'll text you the address. Federal Building, downtown, 11th floor. Bring your daughter if she's willing to provide a statement as well. She will be. See you Wednesday, Mr. Sullivan. The line went dead. I set the phone down, stared at it like it might come back to life and tell me I'd made a mistake. That there was still some other way to handle this. Julia put her hand over mine. You did the right thing. Then why do I feel so terrible? Because he's your son. Because this is hard. Because doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Monday, March 25th. Wednesday was circled in red. Julia had marked it while I was on the phone. 2 days away. 2 days of waiting. 2 days of pretending everything was normal when nothing was normal anymore. My phone could ring any minute. Kyle angry, Kyle threatening, Kyle begging, or worse, silence. Silence that meant he suspected something and was already moving money, destroying records, maybe even running. I thought about the 12 families Andrea had identified. Ernest Coleman, 82, who'd lost his entire retirement fund. Violet Morrison, 75, whose pension was gone. Kenneth Parker, 58, who'd cashed out his 401k early, paid the penalties and taxes because Kyle had convinced him the returns would more than make up for it. All of them trusting Kyle because I'd trusted Kyle. Because Philip had vouched for him. Julia started gathering the documents back into organized stacks. We should make copies of everything, in case something happens to the originals. Good idea. She paused, looked at me. Dad, you know Kyle might try to contact you before Wednesday. I know. What will you say? I thought about that. About what I'd say if my son called, if he showed up at my door. The son who'd stolen from me, who'd threatened me, who'd used my grandson as leverage. Nothing, I said finally. I'll say nothing. Michelle told me not to contact him. That includes responding if he reaches out first. Julia nodded. That's probably wise, but it won't be easy. None of this is easy. We spent the next hour making copies at the FedEx down the street. 3 sets of everything. 1 for the FBI, 1 for us. 1 for Warren's attorney. Julia insisted I call Patricia Wells, a family law attorney. She knew just in case Kyle followed through on his custody threats. When we got back home, I put the calendar on the kitchen counter. Stared at Wednesday's date. 2 days that felt like forever. I just hoped Kyle wouldn't run. The Federal Building downtown sat 17 stories tall, all glass and steel and government authority. Julia and I arrived at 10:45 Wednesday morning, 15 minutes early, passing through metal detectors and showing our IDs to security guards who checked our names against an appointment list. They handed us visitor badges and called an escort to take us to the 11th floor. The hallways were wide and institutional, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Our escort, a young man in a navy suit, led us to a conference room at the end of the corridor. He knocked once, opened the door, and gestured us inside. 2 people stood as we entered. The woman I recognized from her voice, Michelle Brennan. Early 40s, dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a gray pantsuit and a badge clipped to her belt. She extended her hand. Mr. Sullivan, Miss Sullivan, thank you for coming in. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp but not unkind. The kind of eyes that had seen a lot of lies and learned to spot truth. "Now, this is Special Agent David Morgan," she said, gesturing to the man beside her. "He specializes in cybercrimes and digital forensics." David was younger, late 30s, with close-cropped hair and the build of someone who spent time in the gym. He shook our hands quickly, efficiently, then motioned to the chairs across the table. "Please sit." We did. I set my briefcase on the table, the same one Carol had given me 20 years ago for my 50th birthday. Inside were manila folders containing everything I'd promised to bring. Michelle opened a notepad. "Let me start by explaining our process. We'll verify the information you've provided, interview other victims, subpoena financial records, and build a case for prosecution. Initial investigation usually takes 4 to 8 weeks, though we can move faster if the evidence is as strong as it sounds on the phone." "How do you verify everything?" Julia asked. Her voice had that military precision, direct, no nonsense. "We start with the bank records," David said. "Subpoena accounts belonging to your brother and Philip Carver. We'll also look at email communications, phone records, any digital footprint that establishes a pattern of conspiracy." "Conspiracy?" I asked. "When 2 or more people work together to commit fraud, it becomes conspiracy," Michelle explained, "which carries additional penalties. Your son and Philip Carver coordinating to recruit victims, that's textbook conspiracy." I pulled out the folders, handed them across the table one by one. "Andrea Stone's investigation report. Complete victim list, financial analysis, timeline of Kyle's activities." Michelle took it, started flipping through pages. "My bank statements. You can see the transfers. June 2023, 80,000. October, 60,000. December, another 60. David took those, his eyes scanning the numbers. "Stephen Bradley's letter, my accountant. He's the one who first noticed the irregularities. And this," I said, pulling out the last folder, "is Carol's diary. My late wife. She saw it coming. Tried to warn me." Michelle opened the diary pages, photocopies Julia had made, preserving the originals. She read silently for a moment, then looked up at me. "What, Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry you're going through this." I nodded. Couldn't speak. David was typing on his laptop. "With this documentation, we can move quickly. I'll start the digital forensics today, email subpoenas for Sullivan Investment Consulting domain, if it exists. Phone records for Kyle Sullivan and Philip Carver. Bank subpoenas for both their accounts." "How long before you get responses?" Julia asked. "Do banks usually comply within 72 hours? Phone companies about the same. Email providers can take longer depending on the service." Michelle leaned forward. "Mr. Sullivan, tell me about Philip Carver. How long have you known him?" 40 years, since 1984. We met through work, both of us were contractors on a Navy base project. He became my best friend." "Oh, that's a long friendship," Michelle said quietly. "I'm sorry it ended this way." "Has it ended? Yet when we interview him, and we will, he may choose to cooperate. Help us build the case against your son in exchange for leniency. First one through the door usually gets the best deal." I thought about Philip. 40 years of barbecues and poker nights and helping each other move furniture. 40 years of trust that he'd repaid by helping Kyle steal from people. "If he cooperates," I said slowly, "what does that mean?" "He'd testify, provide documentation, explain how the scheme worked, how he recruited victims. In exchange, the prosecutor might recommend reduced charges, possibly probation, instead of prison time." Prison time. The words hit hard. Not just Kyle facing prison, but Philip too. Men I'd known most of my adult life. "Has Kyle contacted you since Sunday?" Michelle asked. "No, nothing. Complete silence." Michelle and David exchanged a look. "So that's concerning," Michelle said. Guilty parties usually react in one of two ways: they flee or they lawyer up immediately. Silence often means they're doing both. You think he's running? Julia asked. Or preparing to, David said. Which is why we need to move fast. I'll request expedited search warrants for his residence and any storage units or secondary properties. We need to secure physical evidence before it disappears. My stomach twisted. What if he's already destroyed everything? Electronic trails are harder to erase than people think, David said. Even deleted emails leave traces. Bank transfers create permanent records. And if he converted money to cryptocurrency, we can track that too. It's not as anonymous as people believe. Michelle closed her notepad. Mr. Sullivan, you're doing the right thing. Financial abuse within families happens far more often than people realize. Most victims never report it because they're ashamed or they're afraid of destroying family relationships. But you're not just helping yourself. You're helping the other victims. Ernest Coleman, Violet Morrison, all of them deserve justice. I thought about Ernest Coleman, 82 years old, who'd trusted Kyle because Philip vouched for him, who'd lost everything because I'd trusted my son. When will you contact the other victims? I asked. Within the next week, Michelle said. We'll need their statements, their documentation. Build a comprehensive case. And then what? Then we present to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They'll review everything and decide whether to file charges. If they move forward, we'll arrest Kyle and Philip. Arraignment, trial, sentencing. The words felt surreal. My son, arrested, trial, prison. Julia reached over, squeezed my hand. Michelle stood. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. Sooner if something urgent comes up. In the meantime, do not contact Kyle. If he reaches out to you, document it, but don't respond. Can you do that? Yes. Good. She handed me a business card with her direct number. Call if anything changes. Anything at all. We stood, shook hands again. The young escort appeared to lead us back downstairs. Julia and I didn't speak until we were outside, standing on the sidewalk in the afternoon sun. The federal building loomed behind us, casting a shadow across the street. Now we wait, Julia said, and hope Kyle doesn't disappear. I didn't know it then, but Kyle's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Thursday morning arrived with sunlight filtering through my bedroom window, the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. For a brief moment, lying in the quiet, I felt something close to peace. Then I remembered why I'd slept at all. I wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. Julia was already downstairs making coffee when I came down. She looked up and smiled. You look better. I feel better. A little. It's not over, she said, handing me a mug. But you don't have to do it alone now. No, I said, I don't. The peace lasted until 10:30 when my phone rang. Andrea Stone. Mr. Sullivan, the FB. I contacted me for my full report. They're moving quickly, faster than I expected. That's good news, right? It is. But there's more. I've spoken with additional victims. Some of them want to meet you if you're willing. I sat at the kitchen table. Why me? Because you reported it. You're Warren Sullivan, Kyle's father, Philip's closest friend. Your name matters to them. They want to see you're real, that you care. When? Tonight. 7 p.m., Community Center on Maple Street. 3 people, the ones who've agreed to go on record. I agreed, though. My stomach tightened. The community center was a low building with cracked pavement out front. Inside, Andrea led me to a small meeting room with folding chairs and a coffee pot on a table. 3 people waited. Warren Sullivan, Andrea said, this is Ernest Coleman, Violet Morrison, and Kenneth Parker. Ernest stood first. He was in his early 80s, hands trembling as he shook mine. He wore a cardigan despite the warm evening. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Please call me Warren. We sat. No one touched the coffee. Ernest spoke first. I invested $85,000 with your son. That was everything I had saved. 40 years as a postal worker. His hands shook harder. Philip Carver and I have been in the Elks Lodge together for 20 years. He vouched for Kyle, said he'd seen the returns himself. He swallowed. That money was for my final years. Now I have $700 and Social Security. Violet spoke next. She was 75, thin in a way that suggested illness. When she moved, I saw the dialysis port on her arm. I'm a widow, she said. My husband died in 2019. I had $100,000 in life insurance. I spent $40,000 on debts and the funeral. I invested the rest because Kyle said it would help cover my medical costs. She looked down. I'm on dialysis 3 times a week. When the money disappeared, I couldn't afford my medications. I ended up hospitalized after skipping doses. My chest tightened. Kenneth Parker was younger, 58, but looked exhausted. A construction business owner, Andrea, had told me. I cashed out my 401k early, he said. $95,000. Paid penalties because Kyle promised returns. I was planning to retire next year. His voice broke. Now I can't. My wife blames me. Says I trusted Philip just because we attend the same church. Each story felt heavier than the last. How did Philip introduce Kyle, I asked. Elks Lodge, Ernest said. After meetings. Church, Kenneth said. Coffee after Mass, Violet nodded. Same. He knew I was struggling. They had trusted Philip. And through him, my son, and through my son, my name. I'm so sorry, I said. They used my reputation, I never knew. We know, Ernest said gently. Andrea told us you lost money too. That doesn't make. You turned him in, Kenneth said firmly. That matters, Violet nodded. Most parents wouldn't. He isn't my son anymore, I said quietly. We sat in silence. What happens now, Ernest asked. The FBI is building the case, I said. They'll interview you all. And our money, Violet asked. I don't know, I admitted. They'll try. But it's probably gone, Kenneth said. Yes. We talked for another hour. Excuses Kyle made. Requests he ignored. Lies he told with ease. When we finally stood, Ernest shook my hand again. Thank you for coming. It helps knowing you care. I drove home in silence. Julia was waiting. How was it? Now I understand, I said. This isn't just about me. She nodded. Losing $200,000 had felt devastating. But seeing Ernest's shaking hands, Violet's dialysis port, hearing Kenneth's cracked voice, that was something else entirely. Kyle had done this. My son. And I couldn't let it stand. Not anymore. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls and emails from Michelle Brennan. The FBI worked with methodical efficiency, building their case piece by piece. I'd wake each morning wondering if today would bring the call, the one saying they'd arrested Kyle and Philip. Instead, each update revealed another layer of the conspiracy I'd stumbled into. Michelle called on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after I'd met the victims at the community center. We've confirmed 12 victims, she said. Total verified losses $1.2 million. I sat down. I'd known there were 12, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way Andrea's report hadn't. Age range, I asked, though I already suspected. Income 52 to 87. All either retired or approaching retirement. All with significant savings or pension funds. Your son and Philip Carver systematically targeted vulnerable populations. The word systematically hit hard. This wasn't opportunistic fraud. It was planned, organized, deliberate. Philip introduced 9 of the 12 victims. Michelle continued. We've mapped out his social networks. 3 through his Elks Lodge, including Ernest Coleman. 3 through his church, including Kenneth Parker. 2 through his veterans group. 2 through neighborhood connections. He used every trust circle he had access to. I thought about Philip. 40 years of friendship. All those barbecues and poker nights and conversations about our kids. He'd been cataloging targets the entire time. How did the scheme work? I asked. Classic Ponzi structure with a recruitment component. Philip identified potential victims, elderly people with savings who trusted easily. He'd make introductions in casual settings, community gatherings, church coffee hours, lodge meetings, build trust over weeks or months. Then Kyle would show up with professional-looking materials and pitch the investment opportunity. And people believed him. Early investors actually received returns, small ones at first, then larger. Those returns came from new investor money standard Ponzi mechanics. It created a trust loop. Victims would tell their friends. Philip would introduce Kyle to those friends. More money came in. But eventually, when there weren't enough new investors to pay the promised returns, the whole thing collapsed. The last people in got nothing. I felt sick. When did it start falling apart? December 2023. That's when Kyle stopped responding to withdrawal requests. People started asking questions. Your accountant caught it in January. By March, when you confronted Kyle, he knew the scheme was dead. He just didn't know you'd go to the FBI. Michelle sent me a summary document that afternoon. 247 pages. I couldn't read most of it. The financial analysis made my eyes glaze over. But one section caught my attention: digital evidence. Over 2,000 emails between Kyle and Philip. Coordination on targeting victims. Discussions about prospects and conversion rates. Planning sessions about what to say, how to overcome objections. Text messages showing Philip's commission structure: 20% of every dollar Kyle brought in. I did the math. 20% of $1.2 million. Philip had earned $240,000 over 22 months. An average of almost $11,000 per month. More than I'd made in my best years as a contractor. That evening, Michelle called again. Warren, I need to show you something. It's difficult, but you need to see it before we move forward with arrests. She sent me an email. Subject line: Evidence, August 2023. I opened the attachment. An email chain between Kyle and Philip. 3 messages. The first was from Kyle, dated August 15th, 2023. Next target is my dad. He's got $380,000 in retirement savings. If we're careful and patient, we can take half without raising immediate suspicion. Need you to warm him up. Remind him how well your investment is doing. Mention you've seen my quarterly reports, etc. Standard protocol. Philip's response: same day. Your dad trusts me completely. We've been friends for 40 years. This will be the easiest one yet. Easy prey. When do you want to start? Kyle's follow-up. Give it 2 weeks. Let him think it's his idea. I'll send materials by mid-September. I read it 3 times. Then I walked to the bathroom and threw up. Julia found me sitting on the bathroom floor 20 minutes later. Dad, I showed her my phone. Watched her face change as she read. Anger first, then something colder. Why, Philip wasn't just an accomplice, she said quietly. He marked you. He studied your finances, planned the approach, and delivered you to his own son to rob. Your best friend for 40 years set you up like you were just another name on a list. Easy prey, I said. The words tasted like poison. Julia sat down next to me. You know what the worst part is? He was right. You did trust him completely. We all did. That's what made it work. The next morning, Michelle called with her final update. We're ready to execute arrest warrants. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse. We've got enough evidence for all of it. The U.S. attorney signed off yesterday. We'll move next week. Next week, I repeated. Yes, Wednesday morning, early. We'll hit both residences simultaneously, Kyle's and Philip's. I wanted you to know in advance. Thank you, Warren. Her voice softened slightly. You did the right thing. I know that doesn't make it easier, but you stopped them from hurting more people. That matters. After she hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold. 1 more week. Then Kyle and Philip would be arrested. Then there would be arraignments and lawyers and trials and all the machinery of justice grinding forward. Julia came downstairs, already dressed in her Navy workout gear. Michelle called. "Arrests next week, Wednesday." She nodded, poured herself coffee, sat across from me. "You okay?" "No." "Yeah, me neither." We sat in silence. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking. A car drove past. Normal morning sounds in a world that felt completely upside down. "One more week," I said. "Then this ends." But I knew it wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The arrests would lead to lawyers and court dates and testimony. Months, maybe years of reliving everything, of sitting in courtrooms while prosecutors presented evidence and defense attorneys tried to tear apart my credibility, of watching my son stand trial as a criminal. That evening, I sat in my home office with the full FBI report open on my laptop, 247 pages Michelle had sent as a secure PDF. I'd tried reading it earlier but couldn't get past the executive summary. Now, with Julia asleep upstairs and the house quiet around me, I forced myself to start from the beginning. What I found changed everything I thought I understood about the last 4 years. Page 43. Section titled, Subject Analysis, Philip James Carver. The FBI had done a complete financial workup going back 10 years. As of December 2021, 2 months before he'd approached Kyle with his so-called business opportunity, Philip had $45,000 in credit card debt across 7 cards, with 4 maxed out. His mortgage was underwater. 2 business ventures had collapsed between 2019 and 2020. The FBI analyst had written in the margin notes, "Subject's financial situation indicates desperation motive." I'd known Philip was struggling, but I hadn't known how bad it was. $45,000 in debt. That kind of weight changes a person. The next section stopped me cold. Timeline of involvement. January 15th, 2022, first documented contact. Email from Philip Carver to Kyle Sullivan with the subject line, "Business Opportunity." I read it 3 times. Kyle, I've been thinking about our conversation at Christmas. You mentioned your sales background. I have an idea for a business venture that could be very profitable. Targets elderly individuals with retirement savings. Low risk, high reward. Interest in discussing. Philip had approached Kyle. Not the other way around. Philip had initiated the entire scheme. I scrolled through the timeline. February 2022. Philip introduces first victim, a man from his Elks Lodge. Amount stolen, $65,000. March through December 2022. 6 more victims recruited by Philip, with total stolen reaching $420,000. Then January 2023, email from Philip to Kyle with the subject line, "Next target, your father." The email was clinical and cold. Warren has significant retirement savings. I estimate $350,000 to $400,000 based on casual conversations over the years. He trusts me completely, 40 years of friendship. With your mother's passing, he's vulnerable. Life insurance payout was substantial. This is our biggest opportunity yet. I felt dizzy. January 2023, a full 6 months before that dinner where Kyle had pitched the investment. Philip had been planning it for half a year. The FBI had traced how Philip gathered intelligence on me. Casual conversations during visits where he'd ask about retirement plans and future goals. I told him everything, thinking he cared. Tax documents he'd seen when he helped me with paperwork after Carol died. My W-2s, my 1099s, my investment statements. I'd been grateful for his help, never imagining he was cataloging my assets. Carol's life insurance payout, because I'd told him about it sitting in his truck after the funeral, both of us drunk me crying about losing her. I'd mentioned the money, said I didn't know what to do with it. He'd been sympathetic and comforting. He'd been taking notes. June 2023. The setup dinner. Philip brings Kyle to my house. Kyle pitches the investment. And Philip, my best friend for 40 years, says, "I'm invested myself, Warren. Best decision I ever made." A complete lie. The FBI had his bank records. He'd never invested a single dollar. But he'd shown me fake statements, with returns of 12 and 15% all fabricated, to convince me his money was in the same fund as mine would be. I remembered that dinner differently now. Philip laughing, telling stories, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Trust Kyle Warren. I've seen his work. He's brilliant with this stuff." Every word calculated. Every gesture rehearsed. My best friend performing a con, selling me to my own son like I was livestock at an auction. The FBI had identified his manipulation techniques. Trust exploitation built on 40 years of friendship. False urgency claiming only a few spots left. Social proof insisting everyone in the lodge was invested. Isolation telling me not to tell Julia yet, to surprise her with the returns. Classic fraud tactics, and I'd fallen for every single one. Philip's spending was documented too. $45,000 in credit card debt paid off by July 2023. $18,000 for home renovations, including the new kitchen I'd been there to see and had told him looked great. $22,000 for a new truck he'd paid cash for. $35,000 listed only as personal expenses with an FBI note stating, "Subject maintains extramarital relationship. Expenses likely related." I scrolled down and found the interview transcript with Marilyn Carver, Philip's sister. Agent Brennan had asked if Philip had a girlfriend. Marilyn confirmed yes for about 2 years now, a woman named Diane Henderson. The name hit me like a fist. Diane Henderson, Courtney's mother. I scrolled faster and found the connection map the FBI had built, showing the Sullivan-Carver-Henderson criminal alliance. Kyle Sullivan married Courtney Henderson in 2020, with their relationship beginning in 2019. Diane Henderson, Courtney's mother, began her relationship with Philip Carver in early 2020. Late 2021. Diane introduces Kyle to Philip at a family gathering, according to an interview with Courtney. January 2022. Philip approaches Kyle with the fraud scheme. 3 families all connected. Sullivan, Carver, Henderson. My son had married into the family that would help destroy me. Philip's girlfriend was my daughter-in-law's mother. They'd all been at the wedding. Diane Henderson had sat 3 rows behind me, smiling through the ceremony. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark office with only the desk lamp glowing. Through the window, I could see the neighbor's house with their porch light, warm and normal people living normal lives. I'd thought this was about a son betraying his father. Kyle stealing from me because he was greedy or reckless or desperate. I'd been wrong. This was a multi-family criminal conspiracy. Philip Carver had orchestrated the entire thing. He'd identified me as a target, researched my finances, planned the approach, recruited Kyle as the front man, and taken 20% of everything they stole. Kyle was a weapon. Philip had aimed him straight at me. 40 years of friendship had been real to me, but to Philip I'd been something else. A mark, a target. Someone to be exploited when the time was right. And the time had been right in January 2022, when his debts had reached $45,000 and he'd needed a way out. I'd thought Philip was Kyle's accomplice. I was wrong. Kyle was Philip's weapon aimed straight at me. 3 days later, on Sunday evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professional, measured the kind of careful tone that comes from years of negotiating in courtrooms. "Mr. Sullivan, my name is Gerald Hoffman. I'm an attorney representing Philip Carver. I'm calling about a sensitive matter." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Stephen's letter months ago, and felt my world crack apart. "Go ahead," I said. Hoffman continued with the efficiency of someone delivering news he'd rehearsed. Philip was arrested Friday morning when the FBI executed their warrants. Your son Kyle was arrested the same day. Both are being held without bail pending arraignment Monday morning. They're charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. These are serious federal charges, Mr. Sullivan. If convicted on all counts, they're each facing decades in prison. I'd known the arrests were coming, but hearing it stated so plainly still hit hard. Kyle in jail. Philip in jail. The machinery of justice grinding forward. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. Hoffman's tone shifted slightly, became more conversational. "Philip wants to cooperate with federal prosecutors. He's seeking a plea deal that would reduce his sentence in exchange for providing detailed testimony against Kyle and full disclosure of all financial records. Part of that cooperation involves victim impact statements. Philip is requesting that you consider providing a statement that acknowledges the value of his cooperation in helping recover assets and ensure Kyle's conviction." I felt my jaw tighten. Philip destroyed a 40-year friendship, recruited nearly a dozen victims through that friendship, and specifically targeted me because he needed money to pay off his credit card debt. Now he wants me to help him get a lighter sentence. Hoffman's voice remained calm. "I understand your anger, Mr. Sullivan. What Philip did was inexcusable. But he realizes that now. He wants to help make this right by ensuring your son faces appropriate consequences. Without Philip's cooperation, Kyle's defense attorneys and I assure you, they'll be expensive and skilled, might find ways to create reasonable doubt. Philip's testimony eliminates that possibility." I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something invisible. Normal Sunday evening sounds. Yeah, what exactly is Philip offering? Hoffman seemed to have been waiting for this question. "Complete records of every conversation with Kyle, every victim recruitment, every planning document. But more importantly, information about offshore accounts the FBI didn't previously know about. Kyle moved significant sums of money that weren't in the initial investigation. Hidden accounts in cryptocurrency and an offshore bank. Without Philip's cooperation, prosecutors might never find that money. With it, they can potentially recover assets for the victims." That caught my attention. "How much money?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss specific amounts, but it's substantial. Well beyond the $117,000 that was previously unaccounted for in your case alone." I thought about Ernest Coleman and his empty savings account, Violet Morrison and her dialysis treatments she'd skipped because she couldn't afford medication. Kenneth Parker, who'd never retire now. "Why should I help Philip?" I asked. "Because you want justice for the other victims," Hoffman said simply. "Philip's testimony ensures Kyle gets convicted and sentenced appropriately. It helps recover money that can be returned to the people who lost everything. And frankly, Mr. Sullivan, without Philip's cooperation, there's a chance Kyle's lawyers could create enough doubt to get him acquitted on some charges. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" The question hung in the air. I told Hoffman I needed time to think, and he gave me 24 hours. After I hung up, I called Julia. She answered on the second ring. "Dad." I explained Hoffman's call, Philip's offer, my uncertainty. Julia was quiet for a moment. Then her voice came back with that military precision I'd heard when she was planning missions. "This isn't about forgiveness," she said. "This is about putting Kyle in prison where he belongs. Use Philip's guilt to help the other victims. Don't let your emotions cloud the strategic goal here." She was right, but it didn't make it easier. I called Michelle Brennan next. She confirmed what Hoffman had said. "Cooperation deals are standard in federal cases," Michelle explained. "Philip's information has already been valuable. He led us to $400,000 Kyle hid in cryptocurrency wallets and an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Money we wouldn't have found without his help. That's money we can potentially recover for victims." "What kind of sentence are we talking about?" I asked. Without cooperation, Philip's looking at 15 to 20 years based on the charges and sentencing guidelines. With substantial cooperation, the prosecutors will recommend leniency. He'd probably serve 5 to 7 years. Still significant time, Mr. Sullivan, but less than he'd face otherwise. 5 to 7 years instead of 15 to 20. For a man in his 60s, that was the difference between getting out while he could still have some kind of life and dying in prison. Part of me wanted him to die in prison, but another part, the part that had sat in that community center and listened to Ernest's shaking voice and seen Violet's dialysis port, knew this wasn't just about my pain. 11 other families deserved justice too. They deserved to get back whatever money could be recovered. They deserved to know Kyle would be convicted and sentenced appropriately. I couldn't let my personal hatred of Philip interfere with that. I called Hoffman back. "I'll provide the statement," I said, "but I want to meet Philip face to face first. He owes me that." Hoffman was quiet for a moment. "I'll arrange it. County jail tomorrow afternoon." A 40-year friendship would end in a concrete room. That night I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow I would sit face to face with Philip, the man I'd trusted like a brother, the man who'd turned me into prey. 40 years of building trust, one calculated plan to destroy it all. Before I take you into that prison room, let me know you're still here by commenting the number 1 if you believe a 40-year friendship can still be salvaged, or the number 0 if you believe some betrayals are unforgivable. The number you choose will reveal what you truly believe. And I need to mention this up front. The story ahead contains some details that have been recreated based on real events for educational purposes. If this doesn't sit right with you, you're welcome to stop watching right now. I completely understand. Monday afternoon arrived faster than I wanted. I drove to the county jail feeling like I was heading toward the end of something I couldn't name. The building sat at the edge of downtown all-gray concrete and razor wire against a pale sky. I passed through security metal detector, ID check visitor badge, and followed a corrections officer down corridors that reeked of disinfectant and institutional food. Steel doors slammed somewhere behind us, echoing off concrete walls. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. The place stripped away humanity, reducing people to numbers and orange jumpsuits and hollow footsteps on linoleum. The attorney meeting room was spare cinder block walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. A narrow window in the door let the guard observe from outside. I sat down, hands shaking, despite my best efforts to steady them. 40 years of friendship had come to this, me on one side of a prison table, Philip on the other, both of us old men who'd run out of road. The door opened. Philip shuffled in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame hands, cuffed in front. He was 64, but looked 70, eyes red and swollen face gray with exhaustion. The guard uncuffed him, stepped outside, closed the door. We sat in silence. I'd known this man since 1984, stood beside him at his wedding, watched him hold my children when they were born. Now he was a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Warren," he said. His voice cracked. I didn't respond. "An apology will never be enough," he continued. "But I need to say it. I'm sorry." "Nanu," I said. "It never will be." He nodded. "I'm not here to make excuses. Hoffman said you wanted the truth. So here it is." "The business failures in 2019 and 2020 buried me," Philip said. "Debt crushing me. Marilyn threatening to stop helping with the mortgage. I felt like I was drowning." He paused. Then there was Diane. She felt like an escape, but the relationship was expensive. I couldn't keep up without money, and I didn't have any. "So you decided to steal it." I met Kyle through Diane in January 2022 at a family gathering. He mentioned financial opportunities. I suggested targeting people with retirement savings, elderly folks who trusted us, Chicon, his voice dropped. It sounded feasible, like a victimless crime. People would invest voluntarily, we'd pay returns with money from new investors. I told myself it could work, but it didn't. No. By late 2022, we'd run out of victims. Money disappeared faster than planned. We couldn't sustain the returns. Kyle wanted bigger targets. Philip's voice broke. That's when I suggested you. The words hit like a physical blow. Kyle hesitated, Philip said. He said, "That's my father." I convinced him. Told him you trusted me completely, that you had retirement savings we could access. I'm the reason he stole from you, Warren. Not Kyle. Me. I stared at him. Why didn't you just ask me for help? I would have loaned you money. Pride, shame. I'd failed too many times. Marilyn knew it. I wanted to fix things myself, prove I wasn't a disaster. He laughed bitterly. So instead, I destroyed everything. Tell me about Kyle. Philip looked down. He started reluctant, didn't want to target you. But once he began, something changed. He enjoyed the manipulation, the lying. He got better at it. Started suggesting victims I felt sick about: elderly widows, cancer patients, people who couldn't afford losses. I tried to pull back. He threatened to expose me. Philip met my eyes. I created a monster, Warren. Couldn't stop it. The FBI said you're cooperating. I gave them everything. Every email, every text. Victim list with recruitment details. Financial spreadsheets tracking every dollar. Cryptocurrency wallet keys. Location of offshore accounts, $400,000 Kyle hid in the Caymans. His voice was flat. I testified before the grand jury last week. I'll testify at trial. Prosecutors offered 5 years instead of 15 to 20, and you want me to support that. I want to help you stop him, Philip said. Ernest, Violet, Kenneth, they deserve justice, full justice. If I can help give them that, maybe this means something. I stood. The chair scraped against concrete. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Philip asked. I looked at him, this man who'd been my friend for 40 years, who'd taught my son to fish, who'd brought casseroles after Carol died. This man who'd targeted me like prey. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, but I can accept your help to stop Kyle from harming anyone else. That's all I can give you. I walked to the door and knocked for the guard. I didn't look back. Some friendships don't survive betrayal. Ours died the moment Philip suggested my name to my son. The door opened, and I stepped into the fluorescent hallway, leaving Philip alone in that concrete room. 40 years gone. Now I had to finish what he'd started. A week after my meeting with Philip, a letter arrived on Tuesday morning. I recognized Kyle's handwriting on the envelope before I saw the return address, County Jail, Los Angeles. I stood in my kitchen holding it, knowing it wouldn't contain a genuine apology. Men like Kyle, men who'd stolen from their own fathers, didn't suddenly find conscience behind bars. Still, I opened it. Dad, I hope you're doing okay. I know I made mistakes, but I never wanted to hurt you. Mistakes. He called stealing $200,000 from me and over $1 million from 11 other people mistakes, like forgetting to take out the trash or missing a dentist appointment. The audacity of that single word made my hands shake. The letter continued in Kyle's familiar handwriting, the same script I'd seen on birthday cards and Christmas lists for 35 years. The business had cash flow problems. I was trying to fix it when Philip panicked and called the FBI. If he'd just given me more time, I could have made everyone whole. I read that paragraph 3 times. Kyle was rewriting history, spinning the fraud as a legitimate business venture that hit temporary difficulties. But I'd seen the FBI reports. There was never a business. There was never any intention to make everyone whole. Sullivan Investment Consulting existed only on fake letterhead and fabricated quarterly statements. The entire operation was designed to steal retirement savings from elderly victims who trusted Philip's introductions and Kyle's professional presentation. Philip was the mastermind dad. He threatened me, said if I didn't help him recruit investors, he'd lie to you about me. I was scared of losing you. This was the boldest lie yet. Philip had confessed the opposite, that he'd recruited Kyle, that he'd initiated contact in January 2022, that he'd suggested targeting me specifically. The FBI had emails proving Philip's role as recruiter and Kyle's role as frontman. But here was Kyle attempting to flip the narrative to paint himself as Philip's victim rather than his partner. I'm so scared in here, Dad. The other inmates are dangerous. I don't belong in a place like this. The plea for sympathy was transparent. Kyle wanted me to feel guilty for his incarceration, to trigger my protective instinct, to make me believe I'd abandoned my son to predators. But Kyle had put himself there. Not me. Not the FBI. Kyle made the choice to steal, to lie, to target vulnerable people systematically over 18 months. Then came the emotional weapon I'd been expecting. Noah asks about me every night. Courtney says he cries constantly because he doesn't understand where Daddy went. It's breaking my heart knowing my son thinks I abandoned him, using Noah. Of course. Kyle knew exactly how to hit me where it hurt most. My 5-year-old grandson, confused and scared, asking questions no child should have to ask. I felt the guilt rise in my chest, the irrational but powerful feeling that I was somehow responsible for Noah's pain. That if I just kept quiet, if I just absorbed the loss, Noah would still have his father at home. But then I remembered Ernest Coleman, 82 years old, his entire life savings gone facing the possibility of Medicaid nursing homes instead of the private care he'd planned for. I remembered Violet Morrison, widowed and on dialysis, her late husband's life insurance stolen. Kenneth Parker, 58, unable to retire as planned, forced to keep working indefinitely. Noah's pain was real, but it wasn't my fault. It was Kyle's. The letter continued. I know I disappointed you. I always felt like I wasn't good enough after Mom died. I tried to make you proud, to build something you'd respect. I know I went about it the wrong way, but my heart was in the right place. This was manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Kyle was reframing his crimes as misguided attempts to earn my approval, exploiting Carol's death and my grief to generate sympathy. But the FBI emails showed the truth. Kyle hadn't been trying to make me proud. He'd been calling me an easy mark and calculating how much he could steal. The final section attacked Julia. Julia has poisoned you against me. She's always been jealous of our relationship. She can't stand that you and I were close. So she's using this situation to drive us apart. Classic manipulation: isolate the victim from his support system, turn father against daughter, create division within the family so Kyle could work on me alone. But I'd learned to recognize these tactics. Andrea Stone had warned me during her investigation. He'll try to make you feel guilty. He'll use your grandson. He'll attack anyone supporting you. Don't fall for it. The letter ended with a direct plea. If you just talk to the prosecutor, tell them I was manipulated by Philip, maybe they'd reduce the charges. You're my father. Please don't let them destroy your son. I set the letter down and stared at it. Every word was a lie or a distortion. Every sentence was designed to manipulate. Kyle hadn't learned anything. He was still lying, still blaming others, still refusing to accept responsibility. This was the same pattern I'd seen since childhood. Borrowed money he'd claimed was gifts. Promises he'd never kept, excuses that blamed everyone but himself. I picked up my phone and called Julia. She arrived within an hour. I handed her the letter without comment. She read it silently, her face hardening with each paragraph. He hasn't learned anything, she said finally. Still lying. I know. Don't respond. Don't give him anything to work with. Any response feeds the manipulation. Her military training showed strategic thinking, cutting off the enemy's lines of communication. He's testing you. seeing if the old tactics still work. They don't, I said. 3 days later, another letter arrived. This one was shorter. Different handwriting, Courtney's. I opened it standing at my mailbox, the morning sun bright overhead. 2 sentences, that was all. If you testify against Kyle, you'll never see Noah again. Choose carefully. I stood there holding that piece of paper, feeling the weight of what Kyle and Courtney were trying to do. They were weaponizing my grandson, threatening to cut me off from the one pure relationship I had left, forcing me to choose between justice for 12 victims and my connection to Noah. I folded the letter carefully and walked back inside. The manipulation had escalated to extortion. Kyle wasn't sorry. He was fighting. And now Courtney had joined the battle. Thursday afternoon, the same week Kyle's letter arrived, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one had a return address that made my stomach drop: Henderson and Associates Family Law. I brought it inside where Julia was working on her laptop at the kitchen table. "What is it?" she asked, looking up. I didn't answer, just opened it with shaking hands. The documents were official court filing stamps, case numbers, legal language designed to intimidate. Emergency petition for custody modification. Petitioner Courtney Sullivan. Respondent Warren Sullivan. The matter concerned Noah Sullivan, minor child, age 5. Julia stood and read over my shoulder as I went through the pages. Courtney was seeking to restrict my access to Noah. The allegations were laid out in cold legal prose, each one more outrageous than the last. Warren Sullivan poses a dangerous influence on the minor child. Warren Sullivan has demonstrated mental instability during recent family conflicts. Warren Sullivan has engaged in parental alienation, poisoning the child's affection against his father. Warren Sullivan is exploiting the family's financial situation for personal publicity and attention. Warren Sullivan has attempted to bribe the minor child with gifts and privileges to turn him against his incarcerated father. Every single allegation was fabricated. Complete fiction designed to paint me as an unstable, vengeful grandfather using my grandson as a weapon against Kyle. "Hi, this is from Kyle," Julia said quietly. Her voice had the flat, analytical tone she used when assessing threats. "He's using Courtney as his proxy. This is about the criminal trial, not about Noah. They're threatening to take away my grandson. They're threatening to take Noah away to force you to stop cooperating with prosecutors," Julia corrected. "It's psychological warfare, standard tactic when the defendant's family attacks the credibility of witnesses." I sat down heavily. The thought of losing Noah, of being cut off from that little boy who called me grandpa, who showed me his drawings, who fell asleep on my shoulder during movies, it felt like drowning. But more than my pain, I thought about what Noah needed. His father was in jail facing federal charges. His mother had spent stolen money knowingly and might face her own charges. I was the only stable grandparent he had, aside from Julia when she wasn't deployed. "There's a hearing in 2 weeks," I said, reading the final page. "Family court moves fast on emergency petitions." Julia pulled out her phone. "We need a lawyer. Now." Within an hour, I was on the phone with Patricia Wells, a family law attorney Michelle Brennan had recommended months ago. Patricia had handled custody cases involving incarcerated parents before. Her voice was steady and professional as I explained the situation. Emergency custody petitions rarely succeed without evidence of immediate danger to the child, Patricia said, after I'd read her the allegations. "These claims are vague and unsubstantiated. No specific incidents, no witnesses, no documentation. Mr. Sullivan, they're trying to intimidate you before the criminal trial. It's psychological pressure, nothing more. So that they'll lose, almost certainly. But we won't just defend. We'll counterattack." Patricia's tone sharpened. "We're going to file our own petition seeking temporary guardianship of Noah. Can we do that? Both parents are facing serious criminal charges. Courtney knowingly spent money from the fraud. The FBI has text messages proving she understood where the money came from. She benefited directly from these crimes. The house they're living in was purchased with stolen funds. Noah needs a stable home with you and Julia while his parents navigate their legal troubles. The strategy made sense, but it felt aggressive. I don't want to take Noah away from Courtney. I just want to see my grandson. This isn't about taking him away. It's about protecting him and protecting your relationship with him. Kyle is willing to weaponize his own son to hurt you. We need to show the court that you're the stable adult in Noah's life right now. Over the next hour, Patricia outlined what we'd need. Character witnesses who could attest to my stability and my relationship with Noah. Documentation of my home, my finances, my support system. Evidence that I was fit to care for a 5-year-old if necessary. Stephen Bradley will vouch for me, I said. Stephen had been my accountant for over 30 years. He'd seen me through Carol's death, through retirement, through all of it. Good. Who else? Andrea Stone, the private investigator. She can speak to my character during her investigation. Excellent. Anyone from the victim meetings? I thought of Ernest Coleman, 82 years old, sitting in that community center telling his story. Ernest Coleman, one of the other victims. He said if I needed anything to call. Perfect. An FBI Special Agent Brennan can provide a statement about your cooperation. Patricia was making notes. We'll also include Julia's military service record, stable family member responsible honorable discharge record. We'll show photos and videos of you with Noah, evidence of an existing loving relationship. What about Courtney? What will she have? Allegations without evidence. The court will require psychological evaluations of all parties. You'll pass. I'm not confident Courtney will, given the pressure she's under and her potential criminal exposures. Patricia paused. Mr. Sullivan, I need you to understand something. Courtney's petition will fail. The court won't restrict grandparent rights without real evidence of danger, but this fight will get ugly. Kyle is willing to hurt Noah to hurt you. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my grandson, about Carol's last diary entries warning me about Kyle, about the 11 other victims who deserved justice, about the choice I was being forced to make between family loyalty and doing what was right. I'm prepared to protect Noah from both of them, I said. Good, Patricia said, because this won't be the last threat. After the call ended, I sat with Julia in the quiet kitchen. 2 fronts now. Criminal court for justice, family court for Noah. I couldn't afford to lose either battle. September arrived 6 months after the arrests. The federal courthouse sat in downtown Los Angeles, all marble columns and glass, the kind of building designed to intimidate. Julia and I arrived early on the first morning of Kyle's trial. Both of us dressed formally, her in navy dress, Blues me in the suit I'd worn to Carol's funeral. Outside television cameras lined the steps. Local news had picked up the story, "Family investment fraud case begins." I kept my head down as reporters shouted questions. Julia walked beside me, her military bearing creating a barrier the press didn't quite dare cross. Inside, we passed through security metal detectors, bag searches, the works. The courtroom itself was exactly what you'd expect from federal court high ceilings, dark wood paneling, an American flag behind the judge's bench. The gallery was packed with victims. I recognized journalists with notebooks, legal observers. I took a seat in the third row. Julia sat beside me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The jury had been selected the week before, 12 regular jurors plus 2 alternates. I'd watched the process carefully. They were a mix, young and old, different backgrounds, different faces. Now they sat in the jury box, looking serious and slightly nervous, as if they understood the weight of what they were about to hear. The prosecution table held Assistant U.S. Attorney Christine Pierce, early 40s, with a reputation for steel when it came to financial crimes. She'd built her career on cases like this, meticulous, prepared, unforgiving. Across from her sat Gerald Hoffman, Kyle's defense attorney. Expensive suit, expensive haircut. I had no idea how Kyle's family was still paying him, but I suspected Courtney's family had money they weren't talking about. Judge Catherine Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was known for harsh sentences in fraud cases, no tolerance for games or excuses. She took her seat and gave the standard instructions to the jury: presumption of innocence, burden of proof, all the phrases I'd heard on television, but never thought would apply to my own son. Philip Carver appeared briefly before being sequestered. He'd pled guilty months ago. Now he'd testify for the prosecution. When he walked past our row, I saw him glance my direction. Then he looked away quickly, like he couldn't bear it. I understood the feeling. Christine Pierce stood for her opening statement. She was systematic, building the timeline piece by piece. January 2022 through March 2024. 12 victims identified. $1.2 million stolen through sophisticated manipulation tactics targeting elderly people with retirement savings. She used visual aids charts showing money flowing from victims to Kyle to personal spending. Photos of the BMW receipts from the Caribbean vacation jewelry purchases from Tiffany's. Email excerpts displayed on a screen for the jury to read. Then she said the words that made my chest tighten. Kyle Sullivan stole from his own father. The man who raised him, who gave him every opportunity, who trusted him completely. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated greed. Every person in that courtroom knew now. My humiliation was public record. The jury looked at me, I felt their eyes, and I wanted to disappear. Gerald Hoffman's opening statement tried to flip the narrative. He painted Philip Carver as the mastermind, Kyle as the young and inexperienced victim, manipulated by a sophisticated older criminal. He claimed Kyle believed the investments were legitimate, that Philip had deceived everyone, including Kyle himself. It was a reasonable doubt strategy. Maybe Kyle didn't know he was committing fraud. Maybe he was just naive. I watched Kyle during Hoffman's speech. He sat at the defense table in a pressed suit and tie, hair, neat-looking, younger than 35. It was deliberate, make him look innocent, like a good son who'd been led astray. He didn't look at me once during the entire opening statement. Not once. Behind the defense table in the gallery, Courtney dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing her part. The first witness was Stephen Bradley, my accountant. He testified about discovering the irregularities in my accounts, about trying to contact Kyle about the warning signs that had been ignored. Stephen was professional and credible. Hoffman's cross-examination was weak. He couldn't shake Stephen's findings, couldn't make the numbers lie. Andrea Stone came next. She walked the jury through her investigation, methodically, timeline, victim identification, financial forensics. She explained how the money moved, who it moved, to what happened to it. The jury leaned forward, taking notes. She was compelling, clear, impossible to dismiss. Then FBI Special Agent David Morgan took the stand. Digital forensics. He presented emails and text messages, showed how money was tracked across accounts, explained cryptocurrency tracing in terms regular people could understand. The evidence was technical, but devastating. Hoffman didn't even try to challenge the technical findings. He couldn't. Each witness built the case higher. No Perry Mason moments for the defense. No sudden revelations. Just evidence piling up like stones, burying any hope of reasonable doubt. Judge Morrison called recess at 5 o'clock. I stood on shaking legs. Julia steadied me. "They're building an airtight case," she said quietly as we walked out. "Hoffman's strategy won't hold," I agreed. "Not against this." That night, I barely slept. Tomorrow, Philip would take the stand as a prosecution witness. The man who'd been my friend for 40 years would testify against my son. 40 years of friendship reduced to sworn testimony in a federal courtroom. I didn't know if I had the courage to sit there and listen. Philip had testified the day before. I sat through every minute, 6 hours of my former friend on the witness stand, walking the jury through the scheme from its first step. He described Kyle's excitement, the way they had targeted me deliberately, the calculation behind every move. His voice cracked when he admitted the betrayal. Gerald Hoffman's cross-examination didn't rattle him. Kyle stared down at the defense table the entire time, never once looking at Philip. By the end of the day, the defense theory that Philip had manipulated an innocent Kyle had completely collapsed. Now it was day 3, my turn. "The United States calls Warren Sullivan," Christine Pierce said. The courtroom went silent. My legs trembled as I stood and walked to the witness stand. The clerk held out a Bible. "Raise your right hand." My hand shook as I placed it on the worn leather. I took the oath words I'd heard countless times, but never imagined speaking against my own son. I sat and looked out over the courtroom. Kyle finally looked at me just briefly, then turned away. Christine began carefully. "My background: Navy veteran factory worker for 30 years, widower since 2021. My relationship with Kyle, biological son, raised from birth close until recently. Carol's death and the grief that followed, leaving me vulnerable. Then the investments. June 2023, when Kyle first pitched the opportunity. He was my son," I said. "I trusted him." The amounts followed. $80,000 in July, $60,000 in October, another $60,000 in December. $200,000 total. Christine asked where the money came from. "Carol's life insurance," I said. $100,000 she kept to protect our family after she was gone. My voice tightened. "And my retirement savings. 30 years of factory wages. Everything we had." Christine displayed an email. "Kyle to Philip, August 2023. I read it aloud. "My dad is an easy mark. He'll give me whatever I want." My voice broke. Easy mark. That's how my son described me. "How did that feel?" Christine asked. I looked at the jury. Like I failed him. Like who he became was somehow my fault. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Christine continued. "Did you teach Kyle to lie? No. To steal? No. To target elderly victims? No. What did you teach him?" I paused. Thought of Carol, then answered steadily. Integrity. Hard work. Loyalty. He chose to throw it away. Gerald Hoffman's cross tried to paint me as controlling, as pressuring Kyle financially. I didn't falter. When he suggested this was revenge, I looked at him and said, "I'm here because 11 other victims lost everything." He ended quickly. Christine allowed a victim impact statement. I told the jury about Ernest Coleman, 82, life savings gone. Violet Morrison, dialysis patient, unable to afford medication. Kenneth Parker, forced to work indefinitely instead of retiring. 12 families destroyed, I said. Not accidents, not mistakes. Deliberate theft. Then I looked at Kyle. "I loved you. I still love you. But I can't protect you from consequences you chose." Kyle looked away. His jaw tightened. Behind him, Courtney sobbed. The government rested. Gerald made a desperate move and put Kyle on the stand. With the evidence stacked against him, they needed to humanize him. Kyle testified that Philip had pressured him, that he believed the investments were legitimate, that he never meant to hurt me. The jury looked unconvinced. Christine's cross-examination was precise. She displayed Kyle's emails. "Dad is an easy mark. We can get $380,000 if we're careful. Make sure he doesn't tell Julia," Kyle stammered. "You wrote easy mark about your father," Christine said. "What did you mean?" It was out of context. "What context makes that acceptable?" He had no answer. Christine continued. "Emails about Violet, perfect, old, trusting. About Ernest Lodge connection makes him easy." Kyle's own words exposed him as a predator. Closing arguments were brief. Christine was clear and emotional. Kyle Sullivan targeted the vulnerable, including his father. "The evidence is overwhelming." Gerald argued reasonable doubt. The jury didn't buy it. At 3 o'clock, Judge Morrison sent the jury out. Julia and I waited with Ernest, Violet, and Kenneth. I paced for 4 hours. At 7, the jury returned quickly. We filed back in. The four-person stood. On count 1, wire fraud. Guilty. Count 2, conspiracy. Guilty. Count 3, elder financial abuse. Guilty. All 17 counts. Guilty on everyone. Kyle showed no emotion. Courtney cried. Gerald rested a hand on Kyle's shoulder. I felt no triumph, only grief. Justice had been done, but my family was broken. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Morrison said you are remanded pending sentencing. Kyle faced 12 to 15 years as marshals led him away in cuffs. Outside, Ernest shook my hand. You honored your wife? I nodded. Carol would be proud. But the cost was everything. Sentencing waited, and the family court battle for Noah still lay ahead. 18 months later, on a Saturday morning in April 2025, I made breakfast for my grandson. Noah sat at the kitchen table, 6 years old now, his backpack already packed for soccer practice. Cereal and orange juice, the simple routine we'd built together. He was talking about practice, excited about tomorrow's game. I listened while I made his lunch, sliced oranges for halftime, did all the ordinary grandfather things. This normalcy, this peaceful Saturday morning was everything I'd fought for. The sentencing had been in October 2024. Judge Morrison presided over Kyle's hearing with the same steel she'd shown throughout the trial. Ernest, Violet, and Kenneth read victim impact statements. Gerald Hoffman pleaded for leniency, first offense young man manipulated by Philip. Christine Pierce asked for the maximum. The judge didn't hesitate. You exploited the trust of society's most vulnerable, she said, looking directly at Kyle. You targeted your own father while he grieved your mother. You've shown no remorse, only manipulation. 12 years federal prison. 5 years supervised release. 1.2 million in restitution split among 12 victims. Permanent ban from financial services. Kyle was led away immediately, no goodbye to Courtney or Noah. Philip got 5 years in a separate hearing the same day. His cooperation recognized testimony against Kyle noted. Marilyn sat in the gallery crying. Philip looked at me once as they led him out. I looked away. Courtney wasn't charged. Prosecutors couldn't prove she knew it was fraud, only that she'd spent the money. She filed for divorce the next day and lost the custody hearing in October. Noah became mine temporarily at first, then permanently when Kyle's appeals were denied in December. Legal guardianship until 2036. Courtney gets 2 supervised hours every week. Now Noah was thriving. He saw a child psychologist monthly, and we'd built consistent routines that made him feel safe. He didn't understand the full story, yet just that his dad had made bad choices and had to be away for a long time. Sometimes he asked when Dad was coming home. It'll be a long time, I told him, but you're safe here with me. Julia helped tremendously. She'd transferred to Norfolk partly to be closer. Her husband Jonathan, a Navy chaplain, was great with Noah played catch, taught him things, gave him a stable male role model. The other soccer parents had been hesitant at first, but they treated us with respect. Now not pity. Small-town life meant everyone knew the story, but we'd earned our place in the community. I attended a monthly support group for financial abuse victims. Ernest, Violet, Kenneth, and I had become close bound by shared trauma. Ernest and I had coffee every week at the local diner. He was teaching Noah chess. Violet sent birthday cards. Kenneth invited us to his 4th of July barbecue last year. They'd become a kind of family. I saw my own therapist weekly working through betrayal pain that felt different from grief over Carol's death. Learning to forgive myself for not seeing the signs earlier. I'd started writing everything down, documenting the story for fraud prevention. Maybe a book someday. Working title, Easy Mark, A Father's Story. Turning tragedy into something educational. I kept Carol's memory alive for Noah. Her photos on the walls, her quilted blanket on his bed. His bedroom was her old sewing room. Grandma was so smart, I told him. She loved you before you were born. He felt connected to her even though they'd never met. Philip had written me twice from prison. Both letters sat unopened in my desk drawer. His sister Marilyn occasionally sent updates apologizing for everything. I was polite but kept my distance. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive Philip. Some things might be unforgivable. The financial recovery was slow. Kyle and Philip earned 12 to 40 cents an hour in prison. At that rate, it would take lifetimes to repay $1.2 million. I'd received $40,000 so far from seized assets, the BMW jewelry recovered cryptocurrency. The FBI had done what they could. I worked part-time at a warehouse 20 hours a week to support Noah. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable. Bills paid, modest savings rebuilt, Noah's needs met. That was enough. I'd lost a son. Kyle was alive but dead to me. I'd gained full-time custody of my grandson. I'd lost $200,000 but gained perspective on what truly mattered. I'd lost a 40-year friendship but learned to recognize manipulation. I hadn't chosen revenge. I'd chosen justice. Not the ending I wanted, but the ending I chose. And choice always mattered. Noah finished his cereal and ran to get his soccer cleats. I grabbed the water bottle and orange slices. He came back cleats in hand and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Grandpa, when I grow up, will I be like my dad?" My heart tightened. I knelt down and looked directly into his eyes. "You'll be yourself," I said, "and I'll help you become the best version of yourself, just like Grandma Carol would have wanted." He nodded satisfied and ran to the car. I followed him out into the bright spring morning, birds singing, sunshine warm on my face. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Some families break, some families rebuild. I'd chosen to rebuild. Carol's photo still sat on my dashboard. Sometimes driving alone, I talked to it. "We're okay, Carol. Noah's safe. I kept my promise. Life goes on. Not the life I'd imagined, but a life worth living." And that was enough. And to you, listening to this story, remember this. What happened to me wasn't just a family story about financial fraud. It was a family story about trust. A family story about choosing truth over comfort. When Carol warned me about Kyle, I should have listened. God gave me a wife who saw clearly when I was blind. God gave me that accountant's letter as a second warning. God even gave me Carol's diary after she was gone, her words reaching across death to protect me. 3 times he tried to tell me, and I almost ignored all 3. Some of you might think this is a dad revenge story, that I destroyed my son to get back at him. It's not. A dad revenge story would have felt satisfying. This just felt necessary. A real dad revenge story has a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm a 73-year-old man raising his grandson because I failed to see what my own son had become. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the warnings. Don't let love make you stupid. Here's what I learned, and I pray you never have to learn it the hard way. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. Being someone's father doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. Sometimes it means letting justice happen so they might someday understand what they did. Carol knew that. I had to learn it. If someone you love is lying to you about money, investigate. If your instincts are screaming, listen. If a deal sounds too good, it is. Don't assume family means safety. Kyle knew exactly how to use my love as a weapon. Philip knew exactly which old friendships to exploit. They studied us like prey. Don't be easy prey. The hardest truth, I still love my son. Even now. Even after everything. That's the part of this dad revenge story that nobody tells you. Revenge would be cleaner. Justice is messy. It breaks your heart while it does what's right. But I'd make the same choice again, because 11 other families deserved the truth, and Noah deserved a grandfather who chose integrity over comfort. Let me be clear about something. I believe forgiveness is possible, but it doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. I believe family is sacred, but not more sacred than truth. And I believe that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no even when it costs you everything. Those are my convictions. They're what got me through the darkest nights, when I wondered if I'd made the right choice. They're what I'm teaching Noah now. If this family story resonated with you, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you handle it? Your story might help someone else. And if you found value in this, please share this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that matter. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this wasn't easy to hear. It wasn't easy to live. And a word of caution, the stories that follow may contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If you prefer not to continue, please feel free to exit now and choose content that better suits your preferences. Thank you for understanding.